Did you ever feel like quitting? Who hasn't? In this life, there will be times, many times perhaps, when it will seem that you just can't make it, that things are too adverse, that there's nothing much you can do about it, and you feel like quitting. But that is a glorious and opportune time to make use of one of the most dynamic, viable principles in human existence. That is the time to make use of the great persistence principle. Never quit.
No one, least of all Dr. Peel, would ever try to make you believe that life is easy. If you aren't faced with some difficulties, you aren't living fully in this world. But instead of caving into problems, you want to keep fighting them, putting one foot in front of the other against even the highest odds, because that's the only way you'll make progress. You keep battling your problems, gaining inch by inch, until the consistent attack ultimately overcomes the difficulty. By trying over and over and over again, you'll finally eliminate any failure pattern. Dr. Peel used to quote General Charles de Gaulle, who once said that difficulty attracts the man of character because it is in embracing it that he realizes himself. In other words, difficulties act as a spur to keep you moving in the direction of a solution. And in the process, you learn who you are and what you can accomplish. One of the stories Dr. Peel told was about a young woman who never gave up her impossible dream to study abroad.
I have a letter here in my pocket from a member of this church. She was born in Indonesia, and she had some dreams about her future life. And not long ago, I baptized the little baby of her husband and herself right here in this church. Because she had the future built into her, she's creating a great future, she and her husband. But listen to the letter. I was still in my home country in Indonesia when I came across one of your books called Stay Alive All Your Life. At that time, I was an unhappy, frustrated college student. I wanted to go abroad badly to receive a better education and to see how the world outside my country looked like. My friends had gone to Europe for study, and I accompanied them one by one to the airport, where I waved goodbye to them. I always came home in tears, asking when it would be my turn to go too. However, my father was a small businessman and had 5 children to take care of. It was impossible for him to finance a study in Europe. I knew a miracle had to happen if I were ever to go abroad to study. Then I found your book, and I learned that I could get what I wanted if I but believed. The book also said that I had to act as if I were sure that I would get what I wanted. I told myself that I would get a scholarship to Germany, the country where I wanted to study, because psychology, the subject I majored in, originated there. I started taking German lessons intensively. I wrote to German universities asking about the possibilities of scholarship. They all replied in the negative. No one would give me a scholarship unless I was already studying in Germany and proving my abilities there, but I kept on believing. My parents thought I'd gone out of my mind to fight such a hopeless struggle. I let them talk, and one wonderful day I received a letter from the University of Bonn that they were willing to consider my application. I was excited and nervous. Now I had to go a step further in my positive thinking. I had to believe that I was going to study at the University of Bonn in Germany. I found a picture of this university, and I pasted it on the wall of my bedroom. I kept looking at it, and I told myself, that is where you are going to study. I learned the German language even more intensively. Then, after an agony of nearly a year, I received a letter that I'd indeed won a scholarship. 3 months later, I left for Germany. This happened about 8 years ago. It was the first but not the last time in my life which showed me that God is willing to give you everything you ask for if you but believe. I always thought I would like to come and meet you. And on this coming Sunday, our first son will be baptized by you. Who would have thought that long ago, as I was still in Indonesia, clinging to that book as my only source of hope? Thank you so very, very much. There is a girl who's now a PhD. Her husband is an MD. Great human beings who didn't live in the past, but who, by the grace of God, got conditioned for the future.
Persistence. That's what she had, and that's what it took. She never quit. She never believed for a minute that a miracle wouldn't happen. She never stopped striving to make her dream a reality. Dr. Peel was very enthusiastic about the plus factor, which he described as that quality of extraness that certain people have. These are the people who live with more eagerness, more energy, and more enthusiasm than their fellow humans. They set higher goals, work for them doggedly through adversity and hardship, shrug off misfortune, and exude warmth, caring, and encouragement to everyone around them. In his book, The Power of the Plus Factor, Dr. Peel quoted the famous words of President Calvin Coolidge. "Nothing in the world can take the place of persistence. Talent will not. Nothing is more common than unsuccessful men with talent. Genius will not. The world is full of educated derelicts. Persistence and determination alone are omnipotent." The slogan, "Press On," has solved and always will solve the problems of the human race.
That's a powerful statement, and it's absolutely true. Persistence is vital because so little of any value is accomplished without it. When you apply the principles of persistence to the challenges in your own life, you can transform a mountain into a rock garden. It's going to take time. It's going to take effort. But you can do it if you're willing to stick with it. How do you tackle your problem areas? Do you try once and then give up? Or do you work on the problem every now and then when you happen to think about it? Or are you striving every day to rise to the challenge and overcome it? Do you stick with it until you find the answer? Or do you give up in disgust when the first few attempts end in failure?
Let me give you an example of what we're talking about. Last Saturday I was working in the garden, and I watched two neighborhood preschoolers while they were learning to tie their shoelaces. Jason came out on the lawn at 9 o'clock in the morning, and he struggled with the problem laces for about 5 minutes. Then he threw up his hands in disgust, pulled the shoes off his feet, and ran off in his socks to play. The other child, Jenny, sat on the grass and studied the situation from all angles. She tried one method after another. She called her mother over to demonstrate the technique again, and then she worked on it some more. After lunch, Jenny was back at it, usually ending up with a knot her mom had to untie. Her vexation was obvious, but she wasn't about to quit. Jason, on the other hand, didn't seem to have much interest, except to come over periodically and take a look at what was going on. Oh, he'd try once or twice to tie his shoes, but he always gave up in a couple of minutes and ran off, leaving Jenny to work on it alone. Finally, just before she had to go in for her nap, Jenny had a breakthrough. Her persistence paid off. She tied her shoes perfectly, and her whoop of joy could be heard up and down the block. It was a lesson to all of us.
How about you? Are you a Jason or a Jenny? Do you quit or do you persevere? If one way doesn't work, do you try another approach to the problem? Here's a story Dr. Peel told about a man who used persistence to turn potential tragedy into triumph.
Take, for example, Joe Engressia. Now, who is Joe Engressia? He is a man who was born blind. And as a little boy, he had two ambitions. One was to become a telephone lineman, and the second was to live in a high-rise building. And the reason he wanted to live in a high-rise building, because as a blind man, he was lonely. And he felt hemmed in. And the reason he wanted to be a telephone lineman was because that man is always engaged in conversation with other people. So Joe read the Bible, and he read these verses, and he committed his life to Jesus Christ. And then he began on the telephone, by request, he was able to make contact with telephone linemen. And from his little room, he talked with them about the telephone system. And he listened and he learned until today. He's considered by some telephone people the most knowledgeable telephone lineman in the United States. And he does it all from his own telephone. In his apartment, they call him for advice. And where does he live? He lives in Denver, the highest city in the United States, 1 mile high. And he lives on the top floor of a 20-story high-rise apartment building. And Joe says, dream high, believe high, think high, and you'll rise high. And what do you think his nickname is? High Rise Joe. He didn't become vice president of the company. He didn't make a lot of money, but he became a successful man because he lived high in his dreams and in his faith.
It took faith, and it took persistence.
Did you ever feel like quitting? Who hasn't? In this life, there will be times, many times perhaps, when it will seem that you just can't make it, that things